And I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Claudia Riegel is joining us. She's the director of the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board, and we're very happy to have her here today. She'll be talking about finding and eliminating mosquitoes in your yard. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can go ahead and share your screen, and we can get started.
Unmuted. And there you go.
Now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much today for inviting me to talk about mosquito IPM. So this is something that we do quite a bit. And for everybody, my name's Claudia, and I work for the city. I'm the director of the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board here in New Orleans. We have a mosquito control program here. We also do rodent control for the City of New Orleans. We've got an IPM program for city buildings. We also work in schools and do a lot of other work. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about mosquitoes. I think that will be of interest to a lot of folks in their backyard. But I always start with the basics, right? And so what are mosquitoes? Okay, they fall in the order Diptera. So they're flies and they've got 2 wings. So they are true flies. So it's really important to know that. So some of these others in the groups are flies and gnats and midges, and mosquitoes are there as well. So flies, basically mosquitoes are flies that bite, okay? And so it's important to know that. So when we're looking at the life cycle, you really, very important to understand if we're working with mosquitoes or ants or rodents, whatever it may be, you have to understand some of the basics of the life cycle of the organism you're dealing with. And so water, of course, is very important, actually necessary for that life cycle. So you've got the adult, let's start with the eggs. So you have eggs that are either laid on in the water or in a container. It's going to hatch, create into a larvae, then a pupa, and then eventually you're going to get that adult that's going to hatch and fly in the air. And so the mosquito larvae are bacterial feeders typically that are, filtering through some of that. So let's talk a little bit about eggs. And again, we have lots of different kinds of mosquito species out there, some that are never going to bother us, okay? They're feeding on frogs, or they're in the woods that are never going to come see you. But we have lots of container mosquitoes that I'll talk about here in a minute that are of concern. But mosquitoes can lay their eggs on or near the surface of water. It really just depends on the species. And you can see this container, it has that little ring around it, that dark ring. Those are egg specks that are on there, little tiny eggs. And also it just depends on the species. Some will lay their eggs in rafts. So some are single and some are rafts. And so the raft that you see, those eggs are all together. Those float on top of the water, and those are Culex, the genus Culex. And we'll talk about that. They're very important. All right. So now, the whole thing is about water. So a big part of our educational campaign is to tip and toss, turn over that water, get rid of that water, because if you don't have that standing water, you're not going to have the mosquitoes. But mosquitoes are going to go through, the larvae will go through different developmental stages called instars. So as they're going to keep growing, and depending on the temperature and the species, we're looking at anywhere from about a week to about 2 weeks that they're going to be in that larval stage. And depending again on the mosquito as well, but about 1/4 of an inch is what we're looking at. And they can develop, depending on the species, in a really tiny amount of water, even in a bottle cap, okay? So it's important to really pay attention. So here's just a nice photograph of a pupa. These do not actually feed. This is the stage right before the adult. So we often are teaching our pest control community, our professionals, and other governmental health workers that might be doing abatement for mosquitoes, because if we don't know what the stages actually do of that life cycle, how do you target that control in a really effective way? So that's part of what we're trying to do here. They're non-feeding about 1 to 4 days or so, and they will move around. So they will dive down. We often will go in and inspect, and it's like, well, where are they? Well, they actually move down into deeper into the water. So often we have to creep up on them. All right, adults, okay, they're gonna emerge from the pupal case, the pupa that I showed you. The males, really easy to tell. Their antennae are gonna be very feathery-like, okay? And the females don't have that. And it's the females, right, that are going to bite. But initially, what's going to happen is even the females are going to go and get some food, and that food typically is going to be nectar from a plant, but they are going to need the blood for egg development. Okay, so typically that's what happens. The females hatch, they're going to go get that nectar from a plant, serving as a pollinator, and then they're going to look for that blood meal that they're going to need for after mating and egg production. And so female mosquitoes feed on both animals and humans. And, that's where it becomes important in some of these arboviral diseases. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. It really, though, does depend on species. And they're attracted to body odors and carbon dioxide from our breath and even body heat. So I'm going to show you a photo here of some of the traps we use to attract them, but we use dry ice in our traps, as carbon dioxide, to bring in and attract those mosquitoes to our traps so that we can do our surveillance. Females typically mate once, and they'll store the sperm for life, so they can produce the eggs, and they need that blood, the proteins in the blood to produce the eggs. Okay, 4 to 5 batches of eggs in a lifetime. Again, it just depends a little bit on the species. Well, there are about 3,500 species of mosquitoes worldwide, and they're found almost everywhere except for Antarctica, right? And but only a few hundred worldwide are going to impact human health. So we're really talking about just a few. Genera most responsible for disease are going to be Aedes, Culex, and Anopheles, right? Anopheles, malaria, Culex, West Nile, Aedes, Zika, chikungunya, and others as well. In the US, we have about 176 species. In Louisiana, we have about 80, okay? And even then, in New Orleans, it's about 28. So you can start to see as you look at your own geography, the numbers probably go down a little bit. And then many of these slides, I've got, you can see references at the bottom. You can snap a photo and look it up for additional information. But we're really only looking at just a handful of mosquitoes of disease importance, even here in Louisiana. So in the mosquito control world, we classify these mosquitoes by breeding habitat, right? So where are they going to be found? So you've got sort of containers, right, which is going to be super important. You've got permanent water, and then you've got, in some situations where it's going to be sort of this floodwater type situation. So it is those, we're here in New Orleans, we've got freshwater floodwater areas, and then we also have the marsh, which is going to be brackish and saltwater. So floodwaters can be in a park, for example, with swales that fill and dry and fill and dry. And so here's your permanent water, your ponds, your slow moving bodies of water, and then of course the container situation. And that is really our big issue here. And frankly, in a lot of urban areas, it's what we're really concerned about. So some of the floodwater breeders, right? So what they'll do actually is they'll lay their eggs, these mosquitoes will lay their eggs just above the water line on that soil surface. And sometimes it's soil surface that's cracked, and they'll get their eggs into those little areas. And what'll happen is as it floods because of rain or tidal flow, you'll get lots of emergence happening. And these are strong flyers, and they're actually pretty aggressive biters. And they can be a big problem for people, livestock, and pets. We actually get the most calls, frankly, from this mosquito, which is found out in our marshy areas, Aedes sollicitans, so the tan salt marsh mosquito. And it can fly, and it uses wind currents as well, and it can go many, many miles. So container breeders, I think this is pretty ubiquitous across different urban areas and frankly, pretty much anywhere. We really need everybody to be careful about their containers. And containers can be a tree hole, as you see one photograph of that tree. And then also bromeliads. I mean, you guys, for your situation here up in New York City, but think about Miami in South Florida. Think about here in New Orleans and other warm areas where it's very common to find bromeliads. And that's a place where water always sits. And so that's another container. Saucers under a bowl, under a plant, that is the #1 container for us. And then also very important are waste tires and, all kinds of other containers that are out there. And so depending on where geography you are in the US, you're going to have different mosquitoes. We have Aedes aegypti mosquitoes and we have Aedes albopictus, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but this is a yellow fever mosquito, Aedes aegypti, Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus, and we have Culex quinquefasciatus, which is the one that's important for West Nile. So there are different species of Culex, depending on what region you are in the US, but they're all really good at transmitting different viruses. So, part of what we're concerned about, right, is there are nuisance mosquitoes, but then there are also vectors, right? And so let's get our definition straight. And what's a vector? These are organisms that can transmit diseases, including bacteria and viruses, or even parasites, right? Malaria, is very important from one plant or one animal or plant to another. And vectors can include insects and snails and rodents and birds and spiders and ticks, for example, are a good example. Very important in the New York region. So let's get a little bit more specific in arthropod, because sometimes you'll hear arthropod-borne disease, right? So those are going to be your insects and arachnids and crustaceans, and those are the ones that mosquitoes are going to fall in. And so, and mosquitoes fall in that category. And we often say mosquito-borne disease. So that's going to narrow it even more, right? Where it is going to be mosquito-driven. And so, and it's going to exclude some of these other arthropods. Now, I think everybody should know West Nile. It is the important disease, a mosquito-borne disease in the U.S. Of course, over the many years, we've had others that have been knocking at our door, and some have even become locally transmitted, such as dengue and chikungunya and Zika virus in South Texas and South Florida. So, but West Nile, is something that we are concerned every day. So this is a mosquito bird disease, but we happen to be a dead-end host. So we're in the wrong place at the right time. So an infected mosquito with West Nile will bite us, or even a horse, for example, could be very deadly for a horse if they're not vaccinated. Humans do not have a vaccine for West Nile virus, but about 20% of the people infected with West Nile will become symptomatic. Some can be pretty devastating, leading even to death, which is very rare, but others can have neurological issues. Some will have a fever, and again, the vast majority will not even know they have it. So we are all about integrated pest management, right? So when it comes to mosquito control, it's about integrated mosquito management. So in order for us to manage mosquitoes, we use a combination of methods so we understand the mosquito biology, the life cycle, and how it's transmitting these different diseases. So surveillance is part of it. Source reduction, biological control. Yes, we use insecticides. What resistance testing is really important, as well as education. So let's briefly go through these different topics so you have a better understanding, because actually mosquito control is really complex. So survey versus surveillance, right? So you may have districts, different locations have different infrastructure for mosquito control. You have everything from nothing, where it's mostly the pest control industry providing some sort of services, all the way to very well-developed programs with a lot of money and equipment, manpower. So it just really depends on the funding location, basically the county, the city across the US. But in some cases, when you do a survey, that's a one-time gathering of information, right? It can be a questionnaire, it can be an annual wildlife survey. But what I'm talking about is surveillance. So it's repeated data collection over time. It can be municipal water quality. And in our situation, it is all about mosquito surveillance. So we can be looking at We have traps that we put out every Monday and collect the mosquitoes on Tuesday, get them all identified. And we're also looking for virus all in 1 week, right? And we do this year round. So why is it important? Well, it tells us what species are active and if they're vectors, right? So here in Louisiana, we've got a very well developed surveillance system across the state. And today is Friday. So we should know from LSU, Louisiana State University, what are our samples that we took them on Wednesday over at the university. We should know that today if they have West Nile or not. So we are able to look at that information and make those very good data-driven decisions. But it also provides this information about good seasonal patterns of what is happening with the program, the mosquitoes, so that we can adjust our program appropriately. And the whole key really is to prevent and manage these disease outbreaks. So there are lots of different types of traps. I wish there was one that collected every kind of mosquito, but that is not the case. And so we have 46 locations across New Orleans. Here's a map, and we've got different locations where we put these traps. And so very important. And so again, put them out on Monday, pick them up on Tuesday, get everything identified, drive the samples to LSU on Wednesday. We know the results on Friday. So it's very valuable information, and we're able to look at this over the course of many years. So told you what we do. We brought them to the lab. We got them identified. We've taken them to LSU. They've screened them for us. And then we start making decisions, right, of what we're going to be doing. I have to look at weather, and I have to look at equipment, and I have to look at, is it a nuisance versus a disease situation, so that we can implement those types of programs. But surveillance is core to this program, having a data-driven program. So the information that's collected in the state is actually pushed through our state Department of Public Health. And then eventually it goes to federal reporting. So this information ends up on the CDC websites. And the reason I'm showing you this is that you can look up your region and see what is happening from year to year. Okay, so it's important. It tells you all different kinds of disease incidences that were found. You can also look at breeding site surveillance. So that may be your swales or your tire piles, other places that are, infrastructure issues that might be wet. So we just don't have the time here today, but we have maps that we use to check and make sure that the site gets remediated, but if we have to larvicide, we do that as well. So source reduction is key, right? So if you don't have the water, you don't have the mosquitoes. And so we need everybody to check their property for standing water. So we always say, take 10 minutes once a week. That's all you need. Turn over those containers, turn over that clutter, check your storm drains, and then of course, check with your local website, your local city or county or parish to see what are the rules for bulky waste. So much of that stuff that you might be keeping in the backyard might be holding water. So check and see how to best dispose. And in the summertime, we really need everybody to check at least once a week because mosquitoes can go from egg to adult in about a week. Okay, so if you're checking once a week, you're removing that water source, reducing the risk of those mosquitoes getting to adult. Every city is different. And we actually have a 311 system here. I know New York does as well. You can call in, we'll inspect your yard, we can turn over container, do what needs to be done to help and educate that resident as well. So last year, December, we launched a social media account. So we're at NOLA Mosquito. And you can follow us, and we go around taking photographs and giving people just different tips that maybe you just didn't think about. I mean, who knew? Even inside your house, right? Not everybody has screens. And so you might overfill and keep that saucer or that lucky bamboo right in the water. So those are places that you do actually need to check. Rain barrels as well. So make sure everyone's using rain barrels properly. Now, really cool with mosquito control is that there are options for biological control. So one would be copepods. These are tiny little crustaceans and of course fish as well. And it's a very important part of our integrated mosquito management program, especially here in New Orleans. It's very common. These are mosquito fish, Gambusia affinis. And please don't just go to your local pet store and introduce fish. there are rules and regulations. We don't want to introduce anything into our natural water sources. So please make sure you check your local regulation and maybe call your local extension agent or even mosquito control district. But they're really great at keeping mosquitoes numbers down. So we use them pretty regularly. And also copepods. These are tiny crustaceans. And actually we're doing a project here. We've been working with copepods for many years, but my goal is to use it on a large scale. And we're actually doing our field trials now to see if that's going to be something that we can actually do as part of the integrated mosquito management program. So really pretty cool. So look, insecticides and larvicides, they are part of mosquito control. It's about using things when only you need it. It is about rotating products. It's about low impact. It's really your last resort, okay? And so why? Especially when you have an epidemic or you're controlling mosquitoes on a large level, it does provide very fast and effective knockdown of these adult vectors, okay? Most everyone now is using ultra low volume. So we're talking 1/2 ounce to 3/4 of an ounce per acre, very tiny droplets. And so again, it's not about, you don't ever spray on, shouldn't spray on a schedule. It's about using data to drive these decisions and making sure that those products still work effectively. There are lots of great green impact, profile products with larvicides. There are oils as well as bacterial driven or derived larvicides. And so that's something that we do. What is also common in the pest control industry and also companies that just do mosquito spraying is that, of course, we can use ultra low volume handheld units, but you see this other person using a mist blower, which are going to be larger droplets, and typically those will have some sort of residual product. Always be very cognizant of edibles and flowers. You should not be spraying those because of our pollinators. We want to be very careful about our non-targets. I just put this here as well. Misting systems is something that you might see on the market. It is, in my opinion, not a great integrated pest management tool. One, because it's kind of indiscriminate, right? Use of pesticides. When you're using pyrethroids, you have to be very careful about fish. So that you're not killing fish, because fish can be very sensitive in water, but it's also spray on demand, right? So I'm just saying this because it has been common in some locations. Part of, again, second to last here section, and we'll wrap it up, is looking at resistance testing. This is a very important part of a true IMM program. And what is insecticide resistance, right? It describes the ability of a strain of an insect to survive normal lethal doses of an insecticide. So you get sprayed on the, let's say on a surface, and that mosquito lands on it, but it's just not killing it. So why? And what we want to make sure is that we never reach that level, right? So we don't want to just put insecticides out that aren't working. So it's a lot of management that goes on. So these are some of the tools that we do. Bottle bioassays. You can visit the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, and they have the whole procedure. But you can also look at this genetically. You can look at it enzymatically, right, based on sort of the genetics of those mosquitoes. And so we are always managing and looking and making sure that our mosquitoes, local mosquitoes, are susceptible. All right, so public education, right? Super important. And when you think about education, it's not just the homeowners or maybe master growers or kids. You have to look at it on a bigger approach. So the way I look at it is we train and educate the industry. We work with our residents. We work with our politicians and administrators. It is across the board so that everybody is on the same page. You know, we talk about the use of repellents, about draining the water, source reduction, how to get rid of bulky waste in the mix. It's important to make sure we talk to our residents. We just did a big waste tire cleanup yesterday. Oh, and look, it's the super fun in a lot of ways because you have so much interaction with the residents, and it's a wonderful opportunity to really talk about city services and what we do and what they can do for everybody to be protected. But you typically are going to have flyers and information that's going to be somewhat local. And then we try to tap into other agencies like Homeland Security that have a huge email list, or neighborhood engagement. And the path we take here is that we also work with our industry, right? So we can't do everything, but there are all kinds of professionals that are out in the field. And we do work to try to get everybody on the same page. And of course, honestly, this is the most fun, is working with schools and the little kids, trying to get everybody educated on mosquito control and rodent control and the other things we do. So just here in summary, look, mosquito control is really complicated. It seems, I think a lot of people just think, the spray trucks are going, and boy, maybe that's just not doing that much. Well, guess what? It's a lot that goes into it to even make the decision of when that truck goes or when it doesn't go, right? But it encompasses a lot of different activities, so that we can really, make sure that we're keeping the public health of our citizens at the forefront and safe, and also having a very robust program, right? So it's all these different things that go into it day in and day out, so that we can make those decisions. And as programs are growing, right, and building, they have to think about equipment and trained personnel and all the stuff that goes into it, and validate all of your methods of control locally, because it may be a little different. And so again, very important to get everybody trained and on the same page. So anyway, but that is what I have. If anybody wants to follow us on social media, we're at NOLA Mosquito. We do also provide a lot of webinars on a variety of different topics. A lot of those are free. So if you do follow us on social media, you can also email us at education@nola.gov if you'd like to be part of our email distribution list. So with that, I really appreciate the invite, and I hope I was able to provide a little bit of more insight on how integrated mosquito management fits into a program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riegel. That was great. And there were some questions that came in the chat. I am going to follow up with you after and see if I can get like a really short answer to some of the questions, and we will make those answers available to folks on the website, so that when people are looking at the recordings, they can get answers to those questions.
Sure.